Alrighty, welcome and thank you for joining us for today's electronic billing state level debrief for workers' compensation, an essential guide to the e-billing clearinghouse climate, including the New York State Workers' Compensation Board CMS 1500 initiative. Today's session is presented by Carisk Intelligent Clearinghouse in collaboration with the New York State Workers' Compensation Board. Before we get started, I'd like to just quickly go over some logistics. We ask that you please submit any questions you may have through the chat feature or the questions feature on the toolbar here in GoToWebinar. And there's going to be 2 opportunities throughout the session to cover your questions. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our blog and YouTube channel for future reference. This presentation, along with some additional resources, will be provided via email to all attendees following the session. We'd like to ask that you please complete the post-webinar survey to provide us feedback on future topics. You'll receive this survey via email following the presentation as well. And at this point, I'd like to pass it over to Sally to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today. We appreciate your participation and the collaboration of the presentation of this webinar. We're excited today with our agenda. We will be covering the introductions of the panelists who will be speaking, state mandates with a heavy focus on the New York State Workers' Compensation CMS 1500 initiative, question and answers for the initiative specifically, and some additional state updates. We'll also cover some clearinghouse services for those of you who are not familiar with us, and then at the end as well, again, time for Q&A. Next slide. To begin, I'd like to start with some introductions. My name is Sally Baglioni, and I am the Vice President of Sales for the Clearinghouse Division. I oversee the sales operation and am the liaison for clients with our internal stakeholders. I have over 20 years experience in product and software sales, customer service, and new business development. Prior to Carisk, I worked for several of the top publishing organizations in the country, and I have a master's degree in business from Monmouth University here in New Jersey. Next, we'll hear from Vincina Annuzzi. Vincina has been with Carisk for 9 years, and in her current position as Director of Implementation and Product Strategy, Vincina oversees all of the clearinghouse operations, including implementation, development projects, and customer service. She works extensively with key industry stakeholders, including our software vendors, providers, carriers, state insurance fund, and the New York State Workers' Compensation Board. Finally, we have Stephanie Zufali here with us today. Stephanie has over 28 years of employee benefit experience working for various New York State agencies, including the Workers' Compensation Board, which she most recently has been with for almost 6 years, the Department of Civil Service, and the Division of Budget. Currently, she is the Director of Regulatory Affairs and Risk Management for the New York State Workers' Compensation Board. And prior to that, she worked for 5 years as a certified public accountant for KPMG in government, banking, and manufacturing sectors, as well as individual and corporate taxation. Stephanie has a BS in accounting from the University of Vermont, and we're very happy to have her here today. Next slide. To begin, let's talk briefly about the role of the clearinghouse in electronic billing. The clearinghouse is the intermediary between the submitter and the receiver. Submitters can be healthcare providers, hospitals, urgent care clinics, billing companies, and receivers are insurance carriers or payers, their third-party administrators, and state boards such as the New York State Workers' Compensation Board. The role of the clearinghouse is to streamline the electronic billing process. Most importantly, it is to provide a receipt of the bill submission, so the submitter has proof of submission in a timely fashion. And it's to get the provider or the submitter paid faster. To do that in the most efficient way, our clearinghouse ingests a variety of data formats. We process them, we scrub them clean, and then we translate them to the data format that the receiver requires. Providing clean data from the submitter to the payer is the key for getting your bills processed quickly and correctly. A key component of what Carisk Intelligent Clearinghouse handles is the process including attaching and exporting the supporting documentation with every bill, which, as you guys know, is required for workers' comp and auto and is a function that many of the commercial clearinghouses cannot perform. Next slide. We will be giving an overview of various state requirements, beginning with and focusing on the state of New York, specifically relating to workers' compensation billing and the state's CMS-1500 initiative. Stephanie will be presenting a lot of information regarding this initiative and the associated requirements. You'll find additional resources pertaining to New York in the appendices at the end of this deck, which, as Paige said, will be disseminated to everyone after the presentation. After the New York segment, Vincina will follow up with the XML submission partner requirements for New York, which Carisk has already successfully completed and is in a small population of clearinghouses who have successfully completed it. Then we'll break for questions specific to New York that Stephanie has been gracious enough to help field. With that, if we can jump to the next slide, I'll hand it over to Stephanie for some detail on the New York CMS-1500 initiative.
Thank you, Sally, and welcome all, and thank you for joining us today for the presentation on New York's CMS-1500 billing for providers. My main focus for today's webinar is to provide you with an update on the CMS-1500 initiative in New York State and answer some of the most frequently asked questions that we've received from providers. Resources are at the end of the presentation if you have additional questions. Next slide. Today's presentation will start with a brief overview of Form CMS-1500. As Form CMS-1500 is already familiar to virtually all medical providers and insurance carriers, the board anticipates a relatively smooth transition. The initiative will leverage providers' current medical billing software and medical records while promoting a more efficient workers' compensation system. After the overview, we'll then take a look at the top questions we receive about Form CMS-1500. Next slide. So let's start with our transition to the Universal Billing Form CMS-1500. Next slide. Providers have indicated that the unique paperwork requirements currently in New York State workers' compensation system are time-consuming and cumbersome to complete. To reduce the administrative burden on providers and encourage participation, the Workers' Compensation Board made the strategic decision to consolidate and eliminate certain medical billing forms and transition to use of Form CMS-1500 along with the medical narrative. Providers are very familiar with this form since it may be used to bill Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, as well as health insurers. Moving to Form CMS-1500 will remove a barrier for healthcare providers to participate in the workers' comp system and ultimately give injured workers more options for treatment. Now let's review the updated timeline and answer some of the most frequently asked questions from providers about the board's transition to Form CMS-1500. Next slide. Form CMS-1500 timeline has recently been updated. Phase 1 is the voluntary submission, which is the phase that we are currently in. During this phase, all board authorized providers may voluntarily transmit Form CMS-1500 medical bills and the required medical narratives or attachments as applicable to payers and the board via email, mail, and electronically. However, it is recommended that it be done electronically through one of the approved XML submission partners, most commonly known as clearinghouses. Payers should be accepting Form CMS-1500 and the required medical narratives now. Many payers are already accepting electronic medical bills, whether by EDI or other format agreed upon between the clearinghouse and the payer. Phase 2 now relates only to payers. Effective October 1st, 2021, all payers will be mandated to accept electronic medical bills from clearinghouses. Also, during this phase, all payer objections must be filed at the same time on Form C8.1B for legal objections or Form C8.4 for valuation objections. Additionally, payers must send an electronic explanation of benefit to the provider if the medical bill came in electronically. The format may be the X12-835 EDI standard. Phase 3 is the mandatory provider submission of Form CMS-1500 as of July 1st, 2022. Although providers may submit the Form CMS-1500 and required medical narrative to payers and the board in a paper format, the board strongly recommends using an XML submission partner to electronically transmit your bills to the payers and to the board. During this phase, payers will also be required to use standard claims adjustment reason codes, or CARCs, on their explanation of benefit forms. If you currently use electronic billing for health insurance, you may already use EDI, sometimes referred to as an X12-837 transaction, or for an explanation of benefits, it's the X12-835. Many of the approved clearinghouses support this approach and can help you to transition to electronic billing for workers' compensation too. Phase 3 will require payers to use specific claims adjustment reason codes, CARC codes, on their provider EOBs when objecting to payment of a medical bill. You can view these CARC codes by visiting our website at wcb.ny.gov and searching for CARC codes. Next slide. Next, we'll discuss Form CMS-1500 requirements from the provider perspective. I will go over registrations for both our medical portal and for XML submission, Form CMS-1500 data requirements, medical narrative requirements, and then discuss EOBs and CARC codes. But first, let's discuss registering for the medical portal. Next slide. Healthcare providers are encouraged to sign up for our medical portal, which allows you to submit medical information and view Workers' Compensation Board information electronically. Healthcare providers who would like to request board authorization or to use the medical portal to access training, the medical treatment guideline lookup tool, drug formulary lookup tool, or onboard limited release, will need to request an ny.gov user ID and password. Registration with the medical portal is required prior to XML submission registration for electronic billing of Form CMS-1500. Next slide. In order to register for the medical portal, you need to provide your healthcare provider NPI and email address. This should be your individual email address, not a group or practice email. Please note that nurse practitioners must request access using their RN license. If you already have access to the New York State Health Commerce System, or HCS, and provide your HCS ID on your request for access, the board will use this to create your medical portal ID if that ID is available. The good news is that administrative staff can help complete some of these steps. In the future, the steps to register authorized providers will be consolidated. Next slide. One more update on the medical portal before I discuss XML submission registration. All healthcare providers who have access to the medical portal will automatically be granted to an online healthcare provider administrative function for the medical portal. This enables healthcare providers to add delegated users to assist with drafting of prior authorization requests and submitting requests for decision on unpaid medical bills, Form HP1. The healthcare provider or administrator will use the medical portal login credentials to access the healthcare provider administration application to assign delegates. Please visit wcb.ny.gov/medical portal and select Access and Administration under the Healthcare Provider section of the page for more details. Next slide. So once your medical portal registration has been submitted, while still on the board's website, you can search for Provider Registration XML to register for electronic submission of Form CMS-1500. This may also be found in the Form CMS-1500 prerequisites page on the board's website. When you're there, click Register, read the overview, click Continue, and then you'll choose your provider type. There's 4 listed: New York State licensed provider who's board authorized, a New York State licensed provider who is not board authorized, an out-of-state provider who is not board authorized and not New York State licensed, and the 4th is an additional category, which may include DME vendors, for example. The registration will then ask for your name, NPI, license number, address, and email. An office administrator can complete these steps to register you and may enter a central email office address. However, the provider will still need to sign or electronically sign the XML agreement that is emailed to the address provided during the online registration. Any provider who has become newly board authorized or has renewed their authorization since mid-February 2021 has already completed this step, since XML registration was folded in with the provider authorization process at that time. Next slide. So how do I know if my clearinghouse is approved to submit this Form CMS-1500 to the board through XML? Clearinghouse status may be found by visiting wcb.ny.gov and typing List of XML submission partners in the search box. Currently, there are 5 approved and several additional organizations that are working their way through the testing process. Individual website addresses and contact information for each are displayed on this webpage. Next slide. Another question we've received relates to payer readiness for the initiative. Specifically, how do you know if a payer accepts electronic medical bills? The board is currently building the capability to collect information on payer readiness for the initiative. When it deploys over the summer, we will ask all payers to enter information on which clearinghouses they partner with. This information will be used to gauge readiness for the October 1st mandate, as well as be posted on our website so that providers will know which payers are ready to accept electronic medical bills. Next slide. So now that you're registered for the medical portal and for XML submission, and you're working with an approved clearinghouse, let's discuss Form CMS-1500 data requirements from the provider's perspective. Next slide. So what is an electronic Form CMS-1500? An electronic CMS-1500 is one that the payer receives from a clearinghouse in an EDI or other agreed upon format. It is not a fax, an email, or a scanned document, although many of the clearinghouses offer services to transcribe paper or scanned documents to the required electronic format. Providers should work with the clearinghouse to understand the various methods and formats for receiving medical bills. So long as the clearinghouse is able to convert the medical bill to a compliant format to send to the payer and the board, along with a medical narrative, the provider will meet the requirements of the CMS-1500 initiative. Next slide. So where can I find instructions on how to fill out Form CMS-1500? There are a number of resources on the board's website regarding Form CMS-1500. PDF examples of Form CMS-1500 by provider type can be found by visiting wcb.ny.gov and searching for CMS-1500 examples. We'll go there now. Paige, if you could hit the link. All right, so on this same page, there's a sample form showing how the information from a doctor's initial report, C4 or the C4.2, the ancillary medical report, the ophthalmologist's report, and the doctor's narrative report, EC4 NAR, transfer from those forms to the CMS 1500. If you go up, we could take a look, at the CMS 1500. So again, there's example by provider type. And if you click on a specific link for the type of provider that you are, you'll see exactly how the information should be filled out on the CMS 1500. So if we could go back to the presentation and click on the, sorry about that page, click on the website link. There we go. So additionally, on our website, there's a section for FAQs and news, each of which is updated regularly. Answers to questions raised during or after this presentation will be posted to the FAQ section of the board's website. Okay, so if we go back to the presentation, next slide. Taking a closer look at the actual Form CMS 1500, where can I find the treating provider's information? The authorized provider who rendered the services, in other words, the treating provider, should include their NPI in field 24J of Form CMS 1500. And they're required to electronically sign the Form CMS 1500 in field 31. These fields are shown by the vertical arrows on the slide. Unique to the workers' compensation are board authorization number and rating code, which should be reported in field 19, shown by the horizontal arrow on the slide. Field 19 captures the board authorization number followed by the rating code. If you're a board authorized provider, your assigned rating code was sent to you with your authorization number. You can find a listing of rating codes on the board's website by searching for rating code. Those that start with the letter C indicate that the provider is board certified in that specialty. Once the clearinghouse sends the medical bill to the board, the date the payer accepted Form CMS 1500 is also located in field 19. This portion is added by the clearinghouse prior to sending it to the board. The clearinghouse will also share this payer acknowledgement with you. This is the date that the clock starts ticking for the payer to timely pay or object to a bill. As you may know, payers must process a medical bill within 45 days of receipt. If they don't, you may file an HP1 with the board to dispute non-payment of the bill. Please note, it's not recommended for providers to resubmit the same medical bills through the clearinghouse to the payer, as this will reset the payer's 45-day window to respond to the bill. Payers or providers should rely on the payer's acknowledgement date. Next slide. So next are the medical narrative requirements. Next slide. Do all Form CMS 1500 submissions require a narrative or attachment? Yes. All Form CMS 1500 submissions require a medical narrative or attachment. I really cannot emphasize this enough. We have seen instances of providers sending in only a paper Form CMS 1500 without any narrative. In most cases, payers will object to these bills and it will take longer for you to get paid. Providers may consolidate a medical narrative and bill for several dates with the one attachment. beginning of the narrative, providers must include 3 mandatory elements that are unique to workers' compensation and are not otherwise found on the Form CMS-1500 data. These are causal relationship of the injury to the patient's work activities, temporary impairment percentages, and the patient's work status. A medical narrative report may be found legally defective if any of these elements are missing. Other sections of the medical narrative are typical components and include history of the injury or illness, any objective findings based on the clinical evaluation, plan of care, and your diagnosis or assessment of the patient. There's also a medical narrative report template that may be used to create the medical narrative report that accompanies the provider submissions of Form CMS-1500. A medical narrative report template can be found by visiting wcb.ny.gov and searching for medical report template. Alternately, providers may extract required narrative information from their electronic records as long as the 3 required components are clearly noted at the top of the narrative. Next slide. As mentioned on the prior slide, there are 3 mandatory elements that are required on most narratives. This slide shows the requirements based on the provider type who rendered the medical services. This chart may be found on the board's website, wcb.ny.gov, by searching on CMS 1500 requirements. For most provider types, causal relationship, temporary impairment percentage, and work status are required with every bill. Causal relationship is not required on a medical narrative when the services are performed by an acupuncturist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, or a physician assistant. Similarly, acupuncturists, OTs, and PTs are not expected to opine on temporary impairment percentage. A medical narrative report may be found legally defective if these required elements are missing. Next slide. Next up are the EOB and CARC codes. Next slide. Will the board require a standard set of codes for payers to use when objecting to a bill? Yes. The board has published a standard set of CARC codes. These codes will be required to be used on explanation of benefits that are sent to the provider effective July 1st, 2022, if a payer objects to a medical bill. There's one set of codes that all payers must use instead of each payer having their own set of codes. So this should make it easier for providers to know why a submitted medical bill was not paid in full. Additionally, the payer must identify all objection reasons at the same time. The same CARC codes will be used on the explanation of benefit as well as Form C8.1B and C8.4. The next slide shows a crosswalk of the CARC codes and the Form C8.1B. Next slide. Today, a payer must submit Form C8.1B and/or Form C8.4 to advise the board and the provider why they are objecting to payment of a medical bill. Effective October 1st, 2021, the payer must list all reasons, both legal and valuation, that they object to payment of the bill on the explanation of benefits that's sent to the provider. In this example, CARC code 197 would be used when a payer objects to treatment that deviates from the medical treatment guidelines without securing a variance. Once payers and providers are accustomed to using the CARC codes, and the board is able to electronically capture the CARC code data directly from the payers, we plan to discontinue both Form C8.1B and C8.4. Next slide. Oh, sorry, one more thing. The objection reasons that you as a provider receive on the EOB should match up with the objections on the C8.1 and the C8.4. Payers and medical bill reviewers should be starting to work on mapping their adjustment codes to the CARC codes set forth by the board. Next slide. A crosswalk of the current objection reasons on Form C8.1B or Form C8.4 to the new CARC codes, as well as the scenarios when the code would be used, and any applicable law or regulation may be found on the board's website at wcb.ny.gov. Search for CARC codes. The crosswalk was recently updated to include an objection reason for billing for medical services after the claimant received a settlement that includes the cost of medical treatments, and also billing for non-formulary prescription drugs without receiving prior authorization. Next slide. There are a number of additional resources available to you on Form CMS-1500. The first is the Form CMS-1500 section of the board's website. You can go there directly using the web address wcb.ny.gov/CMS-1500. We also have a dedicated mailbox to answer all questions on the Form CMS-1500 initiative. The email address is cms1500@wcb.ny.gov. Next slide. The board also distributes information through our social media channels, so please follow the Workers' Compensation Board on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also sign up to receive workers' compensation news, including information on future webinars, straight to your inbox. To sign up, visit the Workers' Comp Board website, scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, and select Get WCB Notifications. Next slide. So thank you for viewing this update on the CMS 1500 initiative. Please contact us if you have any questions on these initiatives or other New York State Workers' Compensation Board initiatives. I'll now turn it over to Vincenia to continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now, these next two slides are going to give an overview of what is entailed in becoming an XML submission partner to the New York Work Comp Board. To start, legal agreements must be executed. Then all of the programming must be completed to translate bill data into XML format according to the board's specifications. In addition, programming must be completed to map the bill data as specified by the board onto an image of the 1500 form. The board is very specific about what data elements they want in which fields of the 1500, including some non-standard data elements such as the provider's work comp board authorization number and rating code, and the work comp board case number. Next slide. Following this programming, prospective partners must complete extensive multi-phase testing with the board prior to gaining approval. Next slide. So the good news is that CIC has completed all necessary requirements and is already an approved XML submission partner to the board. CIC is handling the mapping of the data behind the scenes so that submitting providers do not need to modify their current submission process. CIC will convert data to XML per the board specs and transmit to the board, while also converting bill data to whatever format the payer requires, whether it's the X12837 or some other electronic format. Next slide. We include a link here that we strongly encourage all stakeholders to visit in order to subscribe to the Work Comp Board emails for regular updates regarding the resources that were included in this presentation. And with that, we're going to break for Q&A. Next slide.
Thanks, V. Okay, we'll take a couple questions at this time. The first is, I'm a provider who would like to start submitting CMS 1500 forms and required medical narrative and or attachments. Do I need to register with the Workers' Compensation Board first?
So I'll take that page. Yes, all healthcare providers who submit CMS 1500 forms using an XML submission partner have to register for XML form submission on the board's website before the board will accept their electronic submission through the XML form submission process. From the board's website site, you can search for CMS 1500 prerequisites for additional information and links to register. You may use any board-approved XML submission partner who has been approved to submit the CMS 1500 bills and required medical narrative or attachments. So again, you do need to register, and you do need to register for the medical portal first, then for the XML submission, because the medical portal information will partially link to the XML portion.
Okay, great, thank you. Next is, how do I know if I have previously signed up to submit medical bills electronically?
Okay, I can take that as well. So there is a listing of providers on our website who have already registered to submit XML. On our website, wcb.ny.gov, if you search on providers registered to submit, you'll find a link to an Excel spreadsheet that's called Listing of Providers Registered to Submit XML. And this listing is updated daily. Currently, there's about 11,600 providers listed. And typically, your name will show up there within probably 3 to 4 business days after returning your XML agreement to the board's customer support unit.
Okay, great, thank you. Next, last year, the Work Comp Board indicated that it would not be necessary to file an HP1 when the carrier fails to pay or respond within 45 days. Is this still the case, or is it under development?
So if a payer does not respond, you don't get paid, you will need to submit an HP1 to dispute non-payment. The method for filing HP1s will be changing in the near future as part of our onboard initiative. Those HP1s will be filed through the medical portal. So yes, the HP1 is still going to be required, but it will be changing. It'll be through the medical portal.
Thank you. Next question is, am I correct that the mandatory date of submission electronically is July 1, 2022?
Yes, so the initiative has been extended a year as far as the mandatory components. We previously reported that it was July 1st of 2021. That has moved to July 1st of 2022. The other important aspect that has changed is that we will be requiring providers to transition over to Form CMS-1500, but we will not be mandating the electronic component of it. We highly recommend it. Cannot emphasize that enough for many reasons, including ensuring that all the information that needs to be on the bill is on the bill so that you get paid quicker. So the mandatory date is July 1st, 2022, and that's to transition to Form CMS-1500 or use a clearinghouse to electronically submit your bill.
Great, thank you. Next is, I am a DME provider. I have tried to register with the Work Comp Board and didn't get an answer. Where do I go to register?
So DME vendors should be able to register for the medical portal, and they also should be able to register for XML submission. In the presentation, I indicated that there were 4 categories of provider types for XML submission, and a DME provider would select the fourth type, which was additional or other. But if you're having difficulties, please reach out to us, our CMS 1500 mailbox, and we can help get it to the right folks to, see what the hang up is.
Awesome, thank you. Next is we are a TPA payer. Is the provider putting our T number on the 1500 form? And further, how does the provider's clearinghouse know how to find us? You mentioned a cross-reference being developed this summer. How do the various clearinghouses know how to route the bill to us?
So I'm going to answer the first part. The T number is not something that would be on the bill. What would be on the bill in field 0 of the CMS 1500 is the payer information. So that could be the insurance carrier, or it could be a TPA, but we're not capturing the T number. If it's known, we are requesting that the W number, which is the insurer number, be on the bill. And then I think the second part was related to how will they know. So later this summer, we will be requiring all payers to access our computer system here at the board and to identify the clearinghouses that they are partnered with to receive electronic medical bills. That information will also be available publicly on our website, so that anyone would be able to go in and say, okay, in order to get a bill to the New York State Insurance Fund, I need to go through one of these 3 clearinghouses. So that information related to who the payers partner with will be available publicly on our website, probably starting in August.
Okay, great, thank you. We'll take about 2 more questions and then go through the rest of the presentation, and then we can get to the rest of the questions at the end, if that sounds good. The next question is, one of the most challenging responses for a provider to receive is that they have, quote, deviated from the MTGs without securing a variance, when the provider has in fact abided by the MTGs. Will the CARC be detailed to require the carrier which specific element they believe is deficient?
Well, the CARCs are not, there would not be a one-to-one match between all the elements in a medical treatment guideline and a CARC code. But what you can do is, if there's a CARC and a RARC, a remittance advice reason code, that can supplement the information related to the CARC. So it's not going to be one-to-one, but there may be information in our onboard system that would identify more precisely for the provider, the reason why the payer is not approving a variance. So I'd like to take that as a follow-up, and I can get back to Carisk to provide to the audience here. So I'll take that as a follow-up.
Okay, great, thank you. And then the last question for now, is the October 1 phase 2 deadline likely to slip?
I don't think so. The payer requirements were otherwise going to be July 1st of 2021. And so we extended that 3 months to October 1st, 2021. Only recently, really. So our expectation is that payers should have made a lot of headway towards getting this implemented in the meantime. Part of the reason why the dates were pushed out is because our onboard limited release rollout of the prior authorizations, the drug formulary, and the variance requests is a little bit delayed. And so we didn't want to have too many competing new functions and requirements placed on both providers and payers at the same time. So we are expecting to hit the October 1st deadline.
Okay, great, thank you. We will get to the rest of the questions at the end, but for now, let's move on.
Okay, I'll jump back in. We're going to talk a little bit about various requirements across the nation. As you'll see, these requirements are very different at the national level, from state to state. So it does make it difficult for both submitters and receivers to follow. The good news is that Carisk understands all of these national level requirements, and we're equipped to receive and process bills in every state across the nation correctly and for the highest level of efficiency and success. First up is California, where payers are required to accept all bills electronically. But today, this is an optional process for the provider or the submitter. California does anticipate some rulemaking action in the coming months. So we would recommend anyone in the state of California follow the link here to get updates in California directly. Next slide. Florida is the next state up, in Florida, medical bills may be submitted electronically, and the provider, as long as the provider's insurance carrier agrees. The biggest, largest carrier in Florida to note is Geico, and Geico does currently accept electronic bills for no fault through Carisk as their clearinghouse partner. The other big news from Geico is as of July 29th of this year, which is next month, they will go live and start accepting no-fault bills in New York State. So that's a big deal for anyone who is submitting or processing bills in the state of New York, just to keep an eye on Geico and what's happening there. But they do accept bills all over the country. New York is being added as the last state in the union to the list. So that's a good thing for submitters. Next slide. In Illinois, currently every submitter under the Illinois Workers' Compensation Act must submit a medical claim either electronically or on paper, as long as it is on their standardized form. Again, there's a link here for Illinois. Next slide. In Colorado, the division allows for electronic bills when it is mutually agreed upon by the payer and the provider. So this is a voluntary state, but the pathway is available. Next slide. New Jersey, for those of you in the Northeast, know what we went through just a few years ago with New Jersey's action, requiring both workers' compensation and no-fault bills to be processed electronically. And receivers in New Jersey must acknowledge receipt of that complete electronic medical bill to the submitter. And really, New Jersey was the state that got Geico into the electronic world and has forced that issue across the nation. So that was good for submitters as well. Next slide. North Dakota has a July 1, 2021, this year, mandate for the submission of their bills through or to the for Safety and Insurance Division in the state, and they are currently requiring anyone who submits 50 bills or more per year to do so electronically. And again, Carisk is the exclusive electronic clearinghouse in North Dakota. Next slide. Minnesota has required for over 10 years that all parties on both sides, the submitters and the receivers, to do so electronically. So they were one of the first states to move in this direction, and in 2012 they required that electronic acknowledgement to come through to the submitter as well. So we do have a link on our website that will provide you with a state-by-state update. It's a resource that we keep current, so as things change across the nation, you can utilize that resource at any time, just to click on the state-by-state analysis there. Next slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Carisk Intelligent Clearinghouse and our capabilities. As Stephanie said, there are only a handful of clearinghouses approved for the work comp board, so that's something that you need to keep in mind when processing bills electronically in the state of New York. And Carisk will convert any format, electronic or paper, to the compliant requirement electronically for both the state of New York, the other states of jurisdiction that we work for, and the payers that we submit bills to. It's an end-to-end solution, and it allows for a simple process that can be customized to any software platform that you're using to submit your group health bills. So there's really not anything more that a submitter needs to do. And again, we tailor the output to the payers based on their needs. Today, we're connected to hundreds of software platforms, and that number continues to grow, much because of the mandates in states like North Dakota and New York that are requiring submitters to process their bills electronically. Next slide, please. Our next generation technology simplifies this claim processing for the most efficient and successful electronic billing. We've processed workers' compensation and no-fault bills successfully for over 20 years, and it is very flexible in that we do work to customize the process for each and every submitter and receiver that we work with. It makes for a very easy adoption within your practice, and obviously we are a trusted and compliant platform in the workers' compensation and no-fault arena. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot of our homepage. It's very user-friendly, and it's easy, a tech-enabled solution that's simple for the user, and it does really free up a lot of time. Because of the rigorous validation process, it reduces a lot of manual intervention time on the submitter or the biller side, and this functionality can save your practice a lot of time and speed up your cash flow. We should mention too that the tech-enabled form for the 1500 has 50 lines for service code. So comparatively to the paper form that you might be used to submitting with only 6 lines for service code, the tech-enabled form does allow for additional dates of service and codes so that you can process your bills more efficiently. Sorry about that page. Next slide. We do have a 97% first pass clean claims rate, mostly because of the high level of cleansing and validation that we do on the front end. We can submit your claim and your medical record together, so that can come through your billing platform, and be processed through to the paper. We do provide you with a pre-submission notification. If there's a problem with your bill, your user would be alerted to that problem and could correct it before the bill gets processed direct to the payer. And we do provide payer acceptance or acknowledgement of your submission. So you do get your legal proof of submission for timely filing, and we will store all of the bills and the medical records that you process through our clearinghouse free of charge. Next slide. It's a very easy process to connect to Carisk Intelligent Clearinghouse. We have to, from a provider standpoint, have a registration or an enrollment form completed, and that can be done very simply on our website. Payers do have to execute an agreement, which is simple to do. And then Vincina's team works to establish connectivity and test the EDI exchange. The great news is that we are already connected with hundreds of software vendors and many payers across the nation. Any payer who currently accepts an electronic bill, we have a connection to. And those payers can be researched on our website. We have a research tool right on the website. You can download the payer list and to an Excel spreadsheet if you wanted to, research it on your own. But there is a search engine right on the site that will allow you to look up any payer who may be accepting an electronic bill. And because a lot of that testing and the connectivity is established and the EDI testing has been completed, go live for many of the software vendors that we're working with is as simple as a call to the software vendor to let them know you are connected or registered with us and that you'd like to connect to process your work comp and auto bills. So it's really a quick and easy solution for many of the software vendors that we work with. Next slide. Finally, to learn more, if you'd like to see a customized demo of our system and talk, in specifics about how your software platform would integrate, we're happy to provide you with a demonstration of the portal and the process. It doesn't take longer than 10 or 15 minutes, depending on questions, but we're happy to, either I or someone on the team would be happy to walk you through any processing questions you might have on getting connected to our clearinghouse and what you need to do to start submitting bills. With that, I'll jump it back to Paige to finish with any Q&A. Thank you all for attending today. We really do appreciate your participation here. Paige?
Thanks, Sally. Okay, a couple more questions. Can CMS-1500 paper forms be submitted now to payers in lieu of the C4.2 forms?
Yes, a paper form CMS-1500 with an attachment or a narrative may be sent now to any of the payers.
And I just want to add that CIC is capable of accommodating that. The paper form we are sending to the workers' comp board in the paper form format of the 1500, and we're able to accommodate this if that is a need.
Okay, great. Next is, I understand that onboard limited release goes live this summer. Since other updates are pending this release, such as the new MTGs and DME fee schedule, is there any update as to when this will occur?
So the best bet is to follow along on our website. Any type of news would be reported there. I do know that we plan to roll out the first several functions of onboard limited release later this summer. I think the first part of it, which would be prior authorization requests, are mid to late August, followed by DME in September, and then the HP ones October 1st. So it's right now it's a little bit of a staggered approach, and it'll start mid to late August.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we just have time for one last question, which is, how can I get a copy of this presentation? And that's a great way to wrap it up. So we will be sending out the presentation to all attendees this afternoon. So you will have that in your email. And I'll also mention that if you'd like to sign up for future updates from Carisk, you can email me at paige.grogan@cariskpartners.com or visit our website. And again, your feedback is very important to us, so we ask that you please complete the post-meeting survey that you will receive within the next hour. So thank you for attending, and we hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Paige.